Victoria 3 mods can deliver some really interesting settings, alternate timelines, alternate histories, but in this version, Age of Discovery 1444, it's all about that key year, because you see, this is Victoria 3's answer to an EU4 mod, Europa Universalis 4 that is, another Paradox grand strategy game of course that probably needs no introduction. And as you can tell by this map of Europe, but not just this continent, of course the entire map has been reshaped, this is the answer, 1444. It's, however, still in its fairly early but promising stages, with progress to report and loads of things to show, and I've got a small caveat break in the middle with another mod that I think might interest you as well. So sit back and I'll take you through it all. For starters, of course, you can see that the Americas are, as you would expect, decentralized powers right the way through. This is an EU4 mod, the year is 1444, and it's decentralized powers everywhere. Madagascar not quite reaching its full potential yet, and of course across most of, if not all, in fact, of sub-Saharan Africa, it's decentralized, unplayable nations there too. As we move to the rest of the world though, of course the map that EU4 would focus on, things start to get a lot more interesting. And this mod, at the moment especially, really does deliver at its absolute best by exploring the map. And that's why we'll spend a couple of minutes at the start doing just that. In Asia, you can see Ming and the Japanese shogunate, the main powers, like the normal game. Some other playable nations, it's important to note, up north, by Alaska, and also, of course, in Asia. But then, when we move back to India, you start to see some real differences in the map. Loads of nations here that, of course, are just entirely not playable in Victoria 3. Most of them, important to note, fairly weak powers. I think the highest one I could find was ranked around 20th on the global rankings. That should, of course, probably not really come as a surprise to a lot of viewers of this video. As we move across to the really spicy regions, you may notice a few more nations, and some really fantastic names, by the way. I learned so many names. If you've seen one that really tickled your fancy, why don't you comment it below? I have two in my mind. If you say the same one as me, I'll give you a We Love Heart React. We can play a game out of it. Either way, back to the video, and this is really the spicy bit, of course, because we're moving into Europe now. As we head up from the Arabian Sea, up the Red Sea, into Egypt, of course, one of the larger players, but not the most significant one around the Mediterranean. For that goes to the Ottoman Empire, and we'll jump into a game with them in a second, because I think that Byzantium is potentially, of course, a very tasty treat waiting to be gobbled up. There are actually a whole load of opportunities for some really interesting playthroughs with this kind of star, and that's, I think, what draws me to these alternate history, alternate timeline mods for Victoria 3, and other games like this. I love that when you could take the base game and just reinvent it in a way that instantly changes the dynamics across the board. And of course, looking into Europe, you'll see just that. A fractured but slightly unified France, with England taking a stronghold. Ireland reminding me very much of a Crusader Kings 3 tutorial. And then, of course, last but not least, separate England and Scotland rounding out the British Isles. And then lastly, we have Spain, Castile, Aragon, Portugal, Granada. And that rounds out the changes to the map here. And I just wanted to quickly touch on something else here, because it's important to note that this mod is not yet finished. In fact, it's in its very early stages. And you'll note that as I go into the tech tree, and I already have railways. What? 1440 who? And of course, you may have already noticed up in the top right that the year is still 1836. And that is because this mod doesn't change a lot, in fact most, aside from a few things which we'll cover in the good news towards the end of the video, much of Victoria 3. And so as I'm going through here playing my campaign, I'm still of course engaging with different nations, different borders, different empires, different structures. Speaking of though, the other mod that I mentioned in the introduction is worth mentioning here too. This is the most popular alternate history mod on Steam, and it adds a whole load of formable and releasable nations. And if you like the mod that we've already started looking at, then this one could also tickle your fancy. I started off actually looking at the United States because this is really the crowning jewel for the mod in my perspective. Not only can you unite things like the 13 colonies, but you can also break in and break off every single individual dang state, creating some really interesting playthroughs, potentially, whether they're independent or subjects, or whether you're playing as them themselves. But also, I mean, the opportunities here are endless, not just in the United States, but across the board in this mod pack, because as I took a step back, I started to realize that maybe larger things. Here's another example of the Great Lakes Republic, each one, by the way, having its own flag. And these are just the releasable ones, the ones that you can release from existing nations, i.e. they already exist within them. The other alternative, of course, would be to capture land and form things, like the Roman Empire, which it lets you do, or the European Federation, reviving some nations of history, like ones that existed around the time 1444. And that's kind of accurate as I move here in to try and capture Byzantium. A note from the mod developer then. What's the story with this mod? Will they fill in the blanks? And the message here is an important one. Please, hear it out, because I think it should be heard. For starters, it's important to note that the description, while leaving something to be desired, notes that the mod itself is on the workshop for players who want to try 1444, and that it doesn't really have an actual mod with content like journals, new mechanics, etc., and it'll depend on their time on their hands. It features tweaks here and there, but nothing that you'll really notice by playing. This mod is, of course, all about the map itself and the nations within it, and that's exactly what I've demonstrated to you here in this video. However, that's definitely not the end of the story. I wouldn't make a video about it if it was just a map necessarily, because there's more to be told. And if I look through the comments on the Steam page anyway, we get a little bit more clarity on what it delivers right now, but there's more coming. For starters, we note that all it changes really are the borders, but also buildings and populations. Those are the key things that this mod highlights, and also allows it to keep highly compatible with other mods. Maybe you could play as some of those decentralized powers that we looked at earlier, for example, instead of just using them as targets for colonialism, although oh boy, there's plenty there. However, when I delve even deeper still, it brings good news. There's a future for this mod, with people commenting hours, actually, from the time of making this video, and it looks like every day. But, more importantly, the mod maker says, hey, actually, I've decided that I'm working on this mod. I'm putting time into it. At the moment, I'm learning stuff about journal entries, with other people putting their hands up, offering to help, and the mod maker inviting them to make a group on Discord to discuss future development for the mod. And I guess that's also one of the reasons that I wanted to make a video about it in the first place, because I think that alternate start times are really interesting for fans of Vic3 mods, and 1444, being EU4, would be an especially interesting one for us. So if it's something that you'd like to be interested in helping out in, I'll leave all the links to everything that's been discussed in this video below. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.